Tonight, as our third and fourth installment on Democracy in the Media, it's a pleasure to introduce to you Gordana Icevska. In my limited reading already of her work, the one thing that you realize immediately is that she is a journalist's journalist. She's the winner of several major awards for investigative reporting. She covers the intersection between diversity and politics. As a journalist reporting from the former Yugoslavia and the creation of and then the crisis in Macedonia, this also means covering war and conflict. And it also included playing a very public role, working on the first independent daily newspaper in Macedonia, and also co-founding, is it fair to say, your country's version of maybe The Economist, but the first business weekly magazine called Kapital. She's also been a reporter, a correspondent, and analyst for the BBC, for CNN, for CBC here, for Time Magazine and IWPR. And we're fortunate that she's chosen now to make her home here in Toronto in Canada, where she continues to work as a writer, and as a journalist, and to teach at Ryerson and also at George Brown, where she was, importantly, the Penn lecturer in residence. So I want to say welcome.
Thank you.
We can actually have a seat. I'm not so lucky. But just to start, when you grew up in the former Yugoslavia, it's not a country that had a functioning free press. What made you want to be a journalist in that kind of situation?
Well, thanks for the introduction, and thanks to everybody that came here. Why I wanted to be a journalist? Maybe I should speak up. Is it okay? Can everybody speak up? Okay, I'll try. I'll do my best.
And gather in. It's okay.
But before I go to that one, I just want to ask you, why did you come? Why are you here today? I just want to hear, maybe. Somebody want to share? Why did you come? The title, what was the title of the evening?
Journalism and conflict.
And then it was
something else.
Eastern Europe,
Eastern
stories
Europe.
from Eastern Europe. So
what are the stories people want to hear then? Kosovo.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, I studied Macedonia in university and which is not very common. And I'm always interested in how Macedonia did so much better than the rest of the central part of Yugoslavia.
Good, and we could speak some later. Well, why I asked this question? Obviously, only two people shared their opinion. I'm not going around. Maybe later you will tell us why you're here. But it looks like that still there is some interest about that part of the world that you could hardly find in the media these days. It's something that I would say totally forgotten. It's not out there. Nobody really talks a lot about Bosnia or Macedonia or Croatia. Some of these countries are, like Slovenia, members of the European Union, but still there are many conflicts and there are many issues going on, especially with Kosovo, and there are problems in other countries like Macedonia, and I would say like the whole Balkans. But unfortunately, there are not that many stories in the media, and I don't expect that there will be. But to be honest with you, I hope that there are not going to be many stories in foreign media as well, because when it was really easy to sell story from Macedonia and from the region was when it was really bad, and it was the worst period in the history, the worst period that I remember. Because we know like what sells, only bad news sells, unfortunately. So I just wanted, why I asked you this question, I just wanted to prove. What I do right now, I teach at George Brown, and one of the courses actually analyzes how media in different parts of the world work. And what I do, I really criticize a lot the different media from all around the world. Also, one more time, maybe we proved that they are doing wrong, but they should write more stories about Eastern Europe, looking at you and the crowd that we have here today. But why I actually became a journalist was not, I really didn't have any intention, and if I I didn't really want to do anything with politics. My idea about being a journalist was I always wanted to write, and I was good with words, and I knew that I want to be a journalist. But my idea about journalism, when I was even before high school, was that I'm going to write about books, about arts, entertainment, going to concerts and maybe write about that. That was my idea of being a journalist, and that's what I wanted to do. And then when I started actually in a weekly, it was possible to do some of that. But then when I found, I usually say nowadays, my real job in journalism, which was the first independent daily in the country that was recently established, I told my editors, okay, I just want to be in the art section, and that's what I want to do. And they were like, not really. And then I was like, why? I really know how to write, I know how to do that. And they were like, no, you know, like, we don't really need you there. And I was like, well, why? It exists, it's in the paper, but it was only like, there were only 2 people in that in that part of the newspaper. So you could imagine daily newspaper with only 2 people and 1 editor. That was the arts section in the paper. So I was told, well, if you want to stay not in with arts, you got to do something different. So I ended up working in the city, which I was like, no politics, that's kind of, no, I don't want to do that. So they said, okay, then maybe write about local issues. But when I actually started doing that, I figured it out that the real stories are stories about people. And maybe that area while I was at school that I was interested in arts is one small part of people, especially in a country when there is a craziness and all these changes that were going on in the region and not much money for the arts. So I figured it out that I should, and I really started enjoying it, going out there and talking to the people out there. And then, unfortunately, instead of covering arts and entertainment, I find out that if I want to be a journalist in the region, and if I really want to be in that business, the only area that I should cover are conflicts and wars and politics, and a lot of politics, unfortunately. Because that's what happened. Living in former Yugoslavia, I didn't cover the conflict in Bosnia. I was still at school in that time. But living with the idea that there was a conflict, and then your people are expecting that something bad is going to happen. That's how the life goes on. You live and you all the time expect something bad is going to happen. When, you don't know. And what's that, you again don't know. There are many unanswered questions. So living in that environment and having that hanging somewhere and just listening, like for Macedonia, it was in the south, like at the beginning it started in the north, and like people would say, oh, now it's coming, it happened to Slovenia, it was a short war, it will come over here. Then we had Croatia, then we had Bosnia, and all the time the story goes on. It will happen, it will come over here. Like people waited something bad to happen, and imagine living since 1980, everything went crazy. Then the first conflict was in 1990. And in the next 10 years, that's how the life was actually in Macedonia, just living with the idea that something bad is going to happen. When and what's that, nobody really knew. But that's how the life was. And then, probably when the conflict in Macedonia was the smallest one and the shortest one, but for somebody who lived there, it was actually the conflict that was, I would say, the worst one, because all of the sudden it's totally different when it's in your neighborhood.
And give us just a capsule of that conflict situated for us.
Usually when people ask me what happened to former Yugoslavia and why you had the war, I don't know the answer, but what I usually say, I already talked to some people who have background from the region, or you studied, maybe you know a little bit about the region. The whole Balkans, if we have in this room people from not just former Yugoslavia, Greece, Romania, Bulgaria, and people from the whole Balkans, and if they drink, if they have food, you will have the greatest party in the world. The food is the similar. The music and dances, some of them are similar. People in former Yugoslavia could understand more or less each other. Languages are similar. So it's the greatest party, I could say. But once they start talking about politics, if I were you, I would rather leave this room right away. Because that means that you will have the greatest fight that you could imagine. And also the history involves there as well. Because there is always debate that probably for the people who are in other parts of the world doesn't make sense, and usually the fight starts who came there first, who owned the land first, who was, I don't know, in which battle, who was the winner, who lost, and usually it doesn't make a lot of sense. But they could have a fight that starts, I don't know, hundreds years ago, but they will have a huge fight. So that's how people in the region are. And usually for Macedonia, which was, we had our conflict or our version of the war in 2000 and 2001, which was, as I said, the smallest one. And what actually happened? Macedonia, the whole Yugoslavia was a combination of people with different backgrounds, really diverse ethnic groups, Serbians, Croats, Bosnians, Bosniaks, some Macedonians, Albanians, some Turkish, Roma, and probably it's much longer list, but those are the biggest ethnic groups. But in Macedonia was slightly different because it was not like Bosnia where people mixed and married each other. It's a society with where Albanians and Macedonians. Albanians are a little bit less than 25% of the population, and the rest are Macedonians. Like there are 4% Turkish people and about 3% Roma. So it's majority is Macedonian. But the both communities, they never really had any major interactions, but also not any conflicts as well. It was like a society with two communities that are good neighbors. They respect each other. They do not maybe love each other, but there are no major interactions in between, no mixed marriages, totally divided society. And Macedonians are Orthodox Christians. Albanians that live in Macedonia, majority of them are Muslims. So the division goes on that line as well. And just to give you an idea how and I believe that our conflict happened maybe as a result of the fact that there were no interactions between those two communities. What actually, just maybe to give you an idea, and I shared this story when I taught at Ryerson. I know that I shared this story with, the course was covering diversity, and I shared this story with the students, but I'll just do that again. Just to give you an idea how the whole society function used to be. Now there are some changes. In 1996, which means far before the conflict, together with a colleague of mine who is an Albanian, we decided to write stories about our communities. But our plan was to do a story. I'm Macedonian, Saladin, my colleague and my friend, he is an Albanian, and we decided to write stories about communities, and he took me in an Albanian village, and I took him in a Macedonian village. And he was the one who's going to write the story about the Macedonian village, and I wrote the story about the Albanian village. We just wanted to give the whole story, like how as an outsider or somebody who doesn't really have a chance to spend a lot of time in the community to write a story that will have a different perspective. Working in the daily paper, I ended up, because I really liked writing human interest stories, I ended up writing stories about Albania, so I knew how the community functioned. So I was surprised with some stories that I find out, but my real shock was when I actually took Saladin to the Macedonian village. I was really surprised by Macedonians. How we picked the village, we just decided, okay, it's a small village, we just found it on the map, it's not even on the map, we just actually saw it. It's got to be a really detailed map. If you want to find it, it's going to be hard. We found a place, small village in the eastern part of the country. And how the country is divided, when I'm talking about divided community, even where people are located, there is a division. In the western part of the country, majority of the people are Albanian. Then there are no Albanians in the eastern part of the country. So we just decided to go to the eastern part of the country and to talk to the people in that village. Macedonians and Albanians look the same. You can't really say any difference. And we came into that village. We started talking to the people. They got really excited. For the first time ever, there were 2 journalists in their village that are going to write a story about their village. People started together. We were like, it was like small downtown, like only one cafe, like everybody was around, so excited. Journalists came to their city. And then like maybe 20 minutes into the conversation, when they start talking about their life, how everything, they were farmers, how everything works there. And then they asked us, we said our names when we came, but probably nobody paid attention. But then again, they asked us about our names. Gordana was fine, but when Saladin said Saladin, there was a problem. It's a Muslim name, and right away they know, okay, this guy, it's not a Macedonian. And they got really upset. But it's interesting that they were really upset with me. They got really upset with me how I, as a Macedonian, dare to bring an Albanian to their village. And they became really upset, and then we noticed all of a sudden that all around us, all the women left, all older people left, only young men were around us, and they became really rude, like saying stuff like, why you're here, why you came, why you did this, and even saying like that the only good Albanian, it's a dead Albanian, saying stuff like that. And I got really scared, and I didn't know what I'm going to do. I took Saladin to that village. I'm the one who has to find a way how to leave this place and nothing to happen. But I found fascinating how Saladin was reacting. He somehow managed to keep talking to them. And Saladin is also from a small village in the western part of the country, and very familiar with the problems that farmer has. His family, they're farmers, so he started asking them different questions about their life, the problems that they have, and problems of the farmers pretty much the same, regardless if you're Macedonian or Albanian. And they start talking to him, but while I was trying to make a plan, how do we get out of here? And then all of a sudden, one of the guys who was really, really mad said, wait a minute, there is something wrong here. And then I was like, what now? He said, this guy, it's not an Albanian. That's what he said. And we were like, well, what this means? This guy is not an Albanian. And then he said, why are you saying that? Like, Saladin was like, do you want me to show you ID? Here it is, I'm an Albanian. That's who I am. And no, he was like, it cannot be. I think that something's wrong here because you're too nice to be an Albanian. That's what he said. And then, like, I was like, okay, he thinks Saladin is nice. Maybe we will get out of here somehow. And nothing will going to happen. We gotta leave. But, and I kind of got encouraged to maybe ask a question. So, how do you know that Albanians are bad? How? And then he was like, I know. How many Albanians have you ever met before? And the guy stopped and said, none. This is the first guy that I just met, the first Albanian he ever met in his life. And he was, I could say, in his 30s or something, no, maybe 26, something like that. No, I would say like. So, and that was the first Albanian he ever met in his life. And then the question, the next thing that we asked him, so why you're saying that? How do you know that Albanians are bad? And the answer that actually we got was really a big slap for me and Saladin. and kind of a wake-up call. What he said, I saw it on TV. That was his answer. How he knows Albanians are bad. And actually, that was a big wake-up call. What are we doing? What media are doing in this part of the world? All the time there are politicians talking.
So what was the media like then in 2000 in Macedonia? And what role was it playing?
Yeah, the media in that period, like in 1996, the first daily started, but it was Macedonian language daily newspaper. And then other newspapers that existed there before that were actually papers owned by the government and papers that never really, when reporters that worked there never would go out and interview the people and do stories like the one that Seladin and I try to publish. The daily newspaper tried to write kind of a different stories, but obviously it wasn't enough to have only one paper that would do stories like that, and still TV is much more powerful, and it was obviously the stereotypes and prejudice that divided both communities were out there. Starting as in a daily newspaper as a reporter was quite challenging because of the fact that once we went out and tried to interview the people, it was really hard to explain what are we doing. People would ask even questions, why are you asking me? If you just go on the street to do a couple of streeters and ask questions, they would be like, what you want? Why you do this? People were not used to that. It was totally unusual to do something like that. But then slowly I believe they learned and they accepted the fact that there will be a paper that will do maybe will have a different approach and the paper that does something different. And being in that first daily newspaper, we try to have like stories about other community, the Albanian community, which was not always the easiest way. And I really like going into the community that I never knew anything about it. I discovered the community when I started working there. But of course not everybody was happy with what I was doing. Because usually from my side, from Macedonians, I would get comments like, why you do this? You are a Macedonian and why would you write story about them? It was us and them. And then I would say that after, when the conflict actually started, the whole situation went really bad. Because before that, you could occasionally find stories about others in the media, but mostly they were not out there. But like when the conflict started, the main conflict, as I said, the main division was Albanians and Macedonia, and there was a group of Albanians that believed that the constitution needs to be changed, and Albanians, instead of being defined in the constitution as minority, they have to be considered as a nation, and that was the main actually conflict, to make the country bilingual and to make the country made of two nations, Albanians and Macedonians. I don't know if this all makes sense, probably, but that was the main conflict. And then, because there were no really agreement, the majority, the government, which was predominantly Macedonians, didn't want to make the changes overnight. There was a group of rebellers who decided that we need arms to actually achieve this, and that's how the conflict started. And the conflict was not like in Bosnia. It was isolated in one part of the country. It was not all over the country, but it was in the western part of the country mostly. And the fact that, but it was there, like people all of a sudden became much more aware of who they are and how the media should look. And one thing that I was really disappointed with, that even newspapers, such as the daily paper that I worked for, and also one daily, Albanian independent daily started a couple of years later, they just decided when the conflict started somehow that they are not going to be they're not going to bother to cover whatever goes on with the other community. And all of a sudden it was really important to be a patriot and to write about your community, what are they doing, what's going on with them, and what actually, and the main focus of the media was just to cover events about your community and where you belong. I had a colleague of mine, and actually the first, who was in Albania, he worked for the Macedonian paper. He didn't want to write for Albanian newspapers, but actually what he did when the conflict started, he quit his job because of the pressure that he had from his community telling him, what are you doing there? And also he was irritated with some of the story. He didn't write those type of stories, like he was in a business section which had nothing with the conflict, but like he quit his job because he felt a lot of pressure from his community. And how they looked when the conflict started, maybe the simplest explanation would be, let's say we have an event, a press conference, and then you have Albanians and Macedonians reporters, then the next morning you look at the stories from the same press conference and they're two totally different stories. And also many events have been ignored. If the church is demolished by the Albanians or by the rebels, then it will be a front page on many Macedonian papers, not in Albanian papers. Next day there is a mosque demolished, of course, not in Macedonian papers, and it's going to be, I'm not talking about some heritage objects from 16th, 17th century, not in the other paper. It was totally two different parallel worlds.
And in your research now, you're looking at how other national press look at conflicts, and we'll talk about Iraq and we'll talk about Afghanistan in a few minutes, but I want to learn more about the kind of culture of your journalistic colleagues in that situation, because many of them, of course, had been part of the government press beforehand. It may have been unusual for you to be doing streeters with the public, but I'm sure it was as unusual for many of those journalists to be practicing journalism in a different way. So what was the sort of press club culture like?
When the first independence started, of course, like we were called names, we were not accepted. Nobody from the government officials would ever talk to us. Like they don't just want to deal with us. There was a lot of pressure, and a lot of they just didn't want to talk to us. But slowly, when we start writing the stories, the government started opening, and we had some access, and at least they start giving us interviews, maybe not on a daily basis, but it was much more easier. But I would say what happened with the conflict, and one thing that I was really disappointed was that even people that I learned from, I had some really great editors. They used to work for the state media, but they were always people who actually established the first daily paper in the country. They got in trouble because they did not agree, so they found some money from Soros and from other sources, and they started the paper. And I learned a lot from exactly, I'm having in mind one of my editors who was really great. I learned like everything about going into other communities, covering that, like he spent, and also they brought a lot of reporters from abroad, like from Western countries, to help us. I'm talking about the independent daily paper, to help us and to learn how to write stories in a balanced way. And that was his initiative. When the conflict started, I was not able to recognize that man. All of a sudden, like he said, that he has a responsibility towards his community. And that was end of the balance. He didn't care if the stories are biased or balanced. He even started writing opinions that were really, he just took side. That was his decision.
What about in the newsroom? I mean, that's the editor's suite, but...
In the newsroom, pretty much people were, that's why I said like my Albanian colleague, that's why he quit his job. Because what people would talk, when he was not in the newsroom, he would start, oh, those Albanians, and then all these bad words. But somehow, you know, like he was around, he managed to hear some of these things. And they would be, oh no, we don't have anything against you, but it's just them, it's not you. People felt really obligated to be where their community is. And what I personally did in that period, because I didn't want to be part of that, and what actually happened with the stories, it happened to, I would go out there, do some of the stories, and then you're coming back, and then the stories somehow parts of the stories are missing and it's edited. So I would just refuse to have my name there, or I try to not cover stories that were directly connected in that period with the conflict. But one thing that I did, and as I said, in that period it was easy to sell stories abroad. So it was really, for me, maybe I was able to freelance and do stories for BBC, CNN, especially for IWP, our Institute for War and Peace Reporting. They buy a lot of stuff from local reporters, and then those stories are published in different media, Western media who like them. They have they kind of in that period during the crisis they function as an online network. They would update a lot of things on a daily basis. So that's what I did. But like in the local media, it was totally not possible to do something. Why I did that? I hope that, because what was going on, most of the time, those stories that were published in other media, they would end up, they would end up being republished in the local media, but it was easier to publish them. That's how the editors were acting. They would say, it's not our story, this is published by Time magazine, and then they would republish the story. That's how
so that's to be washed through the Western media before it can come back in.
Yeah, that's what, unfortunately, that some of the stories, that was the circle and the way that they went.
Incredible.
Okay.
I want to ask, I have to ask now about Soros Foundation and their role in all of this, and whether it's net positive or whether it's more complicated.
With this daily newspaper was kind of different because they didn't ask for a grant, they asked for a loan from Soros, and from what I know, they paid back the loan. But it was not the only source of money. But how they started, actually, it was the loan from Soros, but they also applied for different grants in different Western European countries and I believe states as well. But what that daily newspaper did, actually, newspapers in Macedonia were the state-owned, financed by the government, and they were quite expensive. And there was an idea that people don't buy that many newspapers because I know the numbers will mean nothing to you, but the in 1996 the price of the paper was 20 dinars, and what the daily newspaper did, they cut the price to 5. So now you could imagine, and now all of a sudden the whole theory that the people don't want to read newspapers changed. Now everybody was buying the paper because for 5 dinars you can't really buy, you could buy nothing. So, and now these papers are 10 or 15, which means like how many years later. So you could imagine what was the price in that time, and that's why people were not buying the newspapers. But then when the price went to 5 dinars, it was totally just covering the cost of the print, and that's it. There was no money on that. But it was something really, it was a crazy idea, and the owners debated a lot, but it was totally a financial disaster, and they decided to do that in order to see what will happen. And once the circulation rate, Macedonia is a small country, and the circulation from 2,000, which was a ridiculous number, went to 80,000. So you could imagine what happened after those 5 dinners, and eventually the commercials started coming, because now you have a paper that has amazing circulation, the biggest one in the country. So
and then you thought this is the right time to start a business magazine.
Well, that was kind of, that was later. So why the business magazine? It was magazine that had like, I started together with a colleague of mine, but there was nothing really that, and one fascinating thing that in Macedonia, talking about the newspapers and the media, I believe some people know that. Do you know how big is Macedonia actually? Do you know what I'm talking about? It's just a spot on the map. How long you could travel from north to south, any guesses? Or from east to west? How many hours?
5 hours.
4, 5, 6, less. 3 if the roads were better too. So, and how many people live? It's 2 million people. So it's what, half of Toronto. It's a really small country.
And it's 500,000 in the capital, roughly?
600,000
in
in the capital. So
Okay.
it's a really small country. But in such a small country, there are many newspapers. There, how many nowadays? When I believe like 4 or 5 daily newspapers, and also many magazines. How come they all manage? Usually my answer for that is that in that part of the world, people are obsessed with politics and everybody want to know what's going on. So people are getting those papers. So you could see people, and now when the prices went down, they would buy not only one newspaper, they just want to check what other papers have. And all papers obviously are national because it's 2 million people. So, and how starting a business magazine was something why we wanted to do it. The idea was because we thought that there are not enough, especially investigative stories in the country, and where investigative stories or the best investigative stories are, where the money are. So it was our reason why we decided to start the weekly newspaper. It was me and 2 other people, and it looked like a crazy idea to leave the daily paper that was in that period really, it was doing well, and now you're leaving that paper, but we just wanted to do something different, and it was an opportunity to actually do a lot of investigative journalism. So that was my main motive in starting that paper. Did we get rich? No. How we started the paper? We got some grants. We went around and tried to convince people to that this is going to be something great and it's worth putting money in it. And then slowly, when we started publishing, people started advertising because they kind of recognized that we have different type of stories. So it wasn't easy.
How many years did you work on it for?
I was in that paper for like 5 years before I came here. So the paper still exists and they're doing good. They have, when we started the paper, the idea was it's a business magazine, but we're going to have always politics, and we're going to have like, it was not, one part of the paper was focused on business, but the rest was maybe more general interest stuff in it, but now they have more business stuff, so there's no room for that probably. But the paper is doing good, which is great.
And then it was all about that time when you decided to come to North America, first as a fellow with the San Antonio
Okay, that was
Express.
right. But it was, yeah, I spent some, that was actually before the weekly.
Okay.
Never mind. I spent some time in 1999. I got a fellowship and I worked in San Antonio Express News. And when I was told, it was quite competitive fellowship, and they have different newspapers all over the states. And when I find out that I'm going to San Antonio, I was like, what am I going to do there? San Antonio. But once I got there, I figured it out why they actually, based on the stories that I wrote and based on my main interest, why I ended up there. Because it's a part of the states, I mean, the whole North America is really diverse, but in San Antonio it's really mixed, and they have a lot of, I would say, white reporters that have to go into the Hispanic community, and it's a lot of about those stories that have diverse voices. So I believe they just wanted somebody who experienced working in different communities, and that's why I believe I ended up there. And one thing that I believe that I learned there, and I usually say that to the students, I really think that the best thing to do a good story is to go into the community that you do not know anything about it. That's how I discovered Albanian community. I didn't have friends, I didn't know anything. I grew up in a neighborhood that was only Macedonian. When I went to the States, I had to do again the same thing with with the community that I never knew that I'm going to learn anything about. But I went to many parts of the San Antonio where poor people live. I also spent some time with the reporters that cover the border, where they have like a lot of people crossing the border. So I find out that discovering and learning about the new community is totally is the same. It doesn't matter where you are, as long as you could find your way to talk to the people, and if they start opening their hearts, then you have the story. It's easy. You just have to find way how to show them that you understand what are they saying, and once they see the story, and if they really appreciate the stories that you write about them, as long as they are honest, and if you don't, and if you stick to the facts and the words that they said, after it's much easier to come back to that community. That's what I learned with the Albanian community. That's what I learned with the Hispanic community. That's what I learned actually here in Toronto when I came, and not right away, but one of my first assignment here, and the first story that I published was actually for Parkdale Liberty newspaper. We all know how mixed Parkdale is. So I found that there's no difference if you need to talk to Sri Lankan community or Tibetan community in Parkdale than if you need to go and discover, and pretty much it's the same, as long as you could find your way and make people to talk to you.
So how have you found it then in Toronto? Because you've worked with the likes of the BBC and Time Magazine, you've done a stint at the CBC, you've worked for community papers like Parkdale, and you're teaching the next generation of journalists each day.
Well, I could say that was maybe the most, as a journalist, I found that coming to Canada was the most challenging time for me, and I could say maybe the most difficult, because like in other times, like I had the fellowship, I had something pre-arranged, so now you're coming to a country and I didn't know anybody. I knew very few people. Everybody that had any connection or knew something about Canada, before I came, I sent an email, I'm going there. I know you are from Canada, although I would maybe I met some of those people once in my life, asking for names and what to do. And coming here was like, I found that it's totally different than what I expected, especially I was told that with my background, I spent some time also working for IWPR in London in UK, and also some time in States. I was told, well, it's going to be maybe not that easy, but you will be fine, don't worry, you will find a job. But it was not like that. And it's a huge adjustment, and I found now maybe I could realize why. It takes time to learn how everything works, but I know that I have a friend. She works for Skills for Change organization that works with people who are new in the country, and I know that actually from her. She sometimes invites me to go there and talk to her clients about networking and what to do. I know that I'm probably, I usually don't say that I'm a champion in anything, but probably I was a champion in sending emails to the people in my field and asking them about advice and trying to make that network of people that somehow will help me to do to start over again and to be in my field. Was it easy? Was not. What I was doing, I did other jobs as well. One of my unsuccessful job interviews, I went for an interview to work in a coffee shop. It was one of the big chains. I came back home and I said, oh, I think I didn't get the job because they asked me, I made a false resume that I was making, I worked in a coffee shop in London in UK, and I did put something in Macedonia, and then the guy at the interview told me, oh, I thought it's London in Ontario, not London in UK, that's not Canadian, so I didn't get the job. But maybe I didn't get the job, I thought I didn't get the job because I didn't have the Canadian experience.
So British coffee is notoriously bad.
I don't know. But maybe I didn't get the job as well because when I came back and I said where I was, I said I went for an interview at Timothy Hortons. So probably, maybe I said that during the interview, Timothy Hortons, and then I don't know what I said, but I was, when you're coming to a new world, like maybe some small details like that, and people were told me like, well, maybe that's why you didn't get the job, Timothy. But it was a learning process, and and it takes time to actually adjust where you are. But I'd say that probably because Canada has a lot of immigrants and people coming from all over the world, nobody really trusts you, and it takes time to actually do something, to find a real person or organization that will be able to help you. I could say that what I did in my building, first job that I got here, it was a professor at Ryerson University. I went to him and I asked about the journalism program because I was on my way to give up, and I convinced myself that I cannot find a job. I went to him and I told him I want to enroll the program. I saw he was teaching the university, that's how I found him, and I thought maybe he would understand and maybe he could give me an advice. And I told him, and then his comment was, well, you could teach here, why would you go back to school? And I was like, well, come on, now he will say goodbye and he will never call back. But fortunately, John Miller called back and I had a chance, and it was my first teaching job. Because there are people who could actually, who want to give you a chance and who could recognize what's your background. And there are also organizations as well, like my job at George Brown, I really like it, I like what I'm doing. But probably I would never get access there if there was no a program that Penn has, which is lecturer in residence, and without that program, probably I would never be able to make the contacts and to pitch the ideas about the courses that I'm teaching. I developed one course, now I'm developing another course, so probably just coming and knocking at the door, people would be like, well, why are you doing that? But fortunately, as I said, there are organizations that help people to get connected and to find their place in the society. It takes time, and probably the stories that you hear about Canada from abroad are not the same as the stories that you hear. But as I said, it's not easy. Talking about